everybody. Afternoon. So my name's Mike McDonagh. I'm a director with Sigmar. I think my name was mentioned earlier as a gardener outside the office. Thanks to Robbie for embarrassing me there. What he didn't say was that he was sitting in his car for 10 minutes watching me digging up those weeds outside the front of the office. So cheers, Rob. Get you back there. So I'm delighted to welcome on stage 3 people who are going to join me for a panel discussion around sustaining a hybrid culture, looking at bias, belonging, and burnout. So can we welcome on the stage, please, Katie Ingle, Head of Learning and Diversity and Inclusion from Bank of America, Jenny Brown, Chief People Officer from Teamwork, and Laura Flynn in the center there, Head of People Consulting from EY. Before we get going on the discussion, there's a Slido question that I want you guys all to have a look at, please, if you can as well, while we're talking. So 2 questions. The first one, which of the following concerns you most as we further develop hybrid working models? Okay, I won't read through all the options. And then there's a second question. So which of the following excited you most as we further develop hybrid working models? So if you can join the Slido app and go through those, and hopefully we'll get some interesting results that we might have a look at the end of our chat. On that point, I will put my phone away. Thank you very much for joining me. So we're talking about sustaining a hybrid culture, bias, belonging, and burnout. So as our workforces redistribute once more with offices reopening, how should we prepare for the emerging challenges and opportunities around workplace equity, biases, and burnout? Some of these themes have already come up today, I think. So we've been talking backstage. We want to try and freshen this up if we can and think of some different things. So I'm going to lash straight into it. We're going to go on to bias first, okay? Something we were just talking about there, a few different things. So, Katie, I'm going to start with you. So hybrid working seems to tick the box in terms of achieving the flexibility that employees want. But is there a risk of bias seeping into cultures or behaviors that we need to watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we were just having a great conversation on this and made a really good point around whether actually we all have biases, so we know that. And actually whether COVID has kind of taken away some of that and created a level playing field. And obviously now we're building back, so what does that mean? So there's absolutely a risk of that creeping back in, but what those biases are, it can be far-reaching, you know, whether it's proximity and you going to the person outside of your office because they're present and asking them to do a piece of work that gives them development that people at home don't get. Or whether it's gender bias because, you know, perhaps you're a working mum like me and you're at home and you have other things to do in the evenings with children, and therefore you're not in the workplace. So I think there is an element of that creeping in as well. I think as we think about the employees coming back into the office, certainly at Bank of America, you know, we have just in this region about 500 graduates that had never met anyone face to face, and they've been with us, some of them for 2 years, some of them just joined last year. And again, they're all really eager to get back into the office, but we're starting to create this workforce that is kind of siloed, depending on individuals and their needs. And so I think it is something that we're going to need to continue to focus on. And I think from a leader perspective, some of that is about inclusive leadership. How are you getting to know your people? Yep. So this isn't about broad brushing. It's not about saying, okay, you're at a certain level, so you know we're going to have this meeting. Actually, how are you understanding your employees? So as we've gone through COVID, you know, I'm sure you've all met other people's children's parents. You know, you've seen people's personal lives more so than ever before. And you've had to know your employees, certainly in Bank of America, you know, and everyone here has been through a really tough time over the last 2 years. And leaders have had to have empathy around that. So how do we continue that?
Yeah, very good. Laura, bias. When I ask this question, is there a risk of bias seeping into cultures? There is a risk. Okay, that's happening. Yeah. How do we deal with that? How are EY dealing with that? How are you dealing with it?
Yeah, I think what's important is to remember, I guess, some of the positives that came out of the last couple of years, because there was some, and what we saw was there's a real increase in trust and autonomy in our people. And there is a risk that as we go back into a hybrid model, that managers are going to kind of default back to old ways of working. I mean, Lars talked about it this morning. Hybrid working, it's not easy. It's probably the most difficult model to implement. And so, as we try to navigate it, there's a chance that people will go back to the old normal and say, actually, I need to see you to be able to determine how well you're performing.
Yeah.
And remembering actually that the trust and autonomy was there and people really, performed and productivity was high, and making sure that we build that in, and that the future models really focus on that and focus on, okay, so what are the outputs and what are people actually doing, and rather than, being present in the office,
Yeah.
to stay away from actually the likes of the proximity bias, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Jenny, we just talked backstage there about different types of bias, because we're not just talking about gender here, are we? We're talking about a whole myriad of things. How, you work with teamwork, how are you guys dealing with that, or how do you think, the HR community here, the talent community here should be looking at that to try and stop that becoming an issue when you've got people everywhere?
I'm not sure you can actually stop bias, but I do think we need to be very aware that we have it, and be really, I suppose, intentional about what we're trying to do. I think teamwork has a slightly different experience to Laura and Katie, in that Teamwork is a SaaS company, we are a technology company. Our product is designed actually to help people be effective in terms of delivering projects in a remote setting. So, you think we'd know what we were doing.
You're supposed to be the expert here.
I know, yeah.
It's only me and you, by the way, don't worry. Nobody's listening.
But I think actually it's about thinking about what we're doing. Why are we here? Why are we actually working hybridly? I always think we need to have that so what kind of moment in every decision that we're making. We were even saying about it's great that people are coming back into the office and they're creating that connection. And I'm like, but is this actually the moment around which that connection should be made? Is that actually the best use of that opportunity, of that moment? And I think we need to think about our own organization. We need to think about where we sit, what our people do, how they do it, our demographic. I think, we are working cross-generationally, and I think we've accepted that generationally everybody has a slightly different ask and a need. And I really do, and every time I have a conversation around anything, I'm afraid I'm very much a one-trick pony. I always come back to the role of the leader. Because fundamentally what this has shown us more than anything else is the criticality of leadership and actually delivering change and driving behavior.
Yeah.
Gary referenced to the fact that performance is behavior, and I thought that was brilliant, and intention drives attention. So for me, they're really important things to have in our mind always. Sometimes we get a little bit carried away. You might come to a conference, you might hear somebody speak, you might go, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to do that. But maybe actually don't. Maybe just think, maybe I don't do that, because maybe that's not the right thing for me. But I don't think, to your point, we can ever actually escape bias. I think we need to own it.
Yeah.
We need to think about why we have it, how we have it. Do I have it? I have it. Of course I have it. So how am I showing up? How am I demonstrating that I am saying, I have bias? How do we figure this out? How do we learn from each other? How do you inform me? How do I give you permission to call me out if you see me acting in a way that's not okay, that's
Yeah.
not aligned to what we say is important and what matters?
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of stripping it back, being really honest about it, calling each other out, recognizing it, and really, again, focusing on the role of leader.
Yeah. So I was speaking to a few people in preparation for this, and one of the things that I was talking about with one person was that bias can be said to sort of relate to our beliefs. And if you think about something that you believe, I mean, fundamentally that is like right in the center of your kind of heart and soul. And it's, I think you said it, or one of you said it was, that I believe that, leadership, and some leaders out there, some of our leaders back in the office or wherever they are, will believe that you need to be in the office, and it's how do we challenge those beliefs, again, as sort of HR, people leaders, how do we challenge those? Because that's a really kind of emotive thing, isn't it? And the problem is, I think some say, CEOs, managing directors, whatever you want to describe it, they don't probably recognize how those beliefs are being manifested in the decisions that they're making, but other people can see them. We can see them, but how do we then challenge those and try and strip those back so that we can kind of recreate the world that, the people we want to hire and have hired, they want to work in. Katie, there was a question somewhere in that, I think. So
That's okay.
yeah.
I got it.
Prize for anyone in the audience, you can find it.
I've been working with Rob for too long. I'm sorry.
So my first thought on this is that we need to reframe, right? This isn't reframing in the hybrid environment. It's actually reframing as an organization. What does productivity look like? What is our output? And then actively questioning, what does commitment look like? What does hard work mean for us as an organization? And then kind of saying, okay, how do we get there? And it's not about changing, it's not about saying, well, in the hybrid environment, you don't do this or that. It's actually questioning our judgment again and reframing that, what does hard work actually look like to us? So yeah, you do have those leaders that are, really focused on, I was in the office 5 days a week or more, presenteeism. But actually, has that created the best employee in the past? And I think we've got to reframe that, and leaders have got to really dig deep on reframing that. I've certainly heard some great stories talking to people today around, leaders who previously were, so pro being in the office, and COVID has happened and ways of working has changed, and all of a sudden it's fantastic for them to be at home and, adapting. And I think that's where our leaders have really got to dig deep, reframe, and really think and be purposeful about what we do go forward and embrace the change that's happening.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to switch on to belonging now. So, Laura, what are we or what are the companies doing to reset belonging in a hybrid world?
So maybe if I kind of start, I guess, with belonging and where it's landed in this kind of phase of the, this way of working. David spoke earlier about connection, and we've actually just got our results of our global belonging barometer, and actually the theme that's coming out really strongly in this is a theme of loneliness. So what we found is that 80% of the respondents said that they have or they do feel lonely, and that 50% said actually far more lonely than they did pre-pandemic. And that's huge, if you think about, well, what does that mean? That, lonely being the opposite of engaged and connected, and actually that leads to a higher propensity to look for a new job, which is great maybe for Sigmar, but maybe not for everybody else. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do, but it's not really that belonging is a point problem with a point solution. It's multifaceted. There's a lot of things that need to kind of come together to really create that sense of belonging. And so in our simplest way of thinking about it, I mean, we like to come up with kind of easy phrases that we remember. So we always talk about it as bricks, bytes, and behaviors. So bricks being, your physical workplace, and how are you redesigning that to enable people to connect when they come in. So to Katie's point of, you want to be really purposeful in terms of what people are coming into the office to do. And so then you need to think about, well, how does the office space enable that and allow them to do that, and they're not just going to come in to sit in a corner and squirrel away at their desk. Then on the bytes piece is the whole digital workspace that then enables all of that, and how do you create the connection through the digital workplace. And there's been huge adoption of technology over the last 2 years, more than I think any of us ever expected to see in such a quick time frame. But again, it's really thinking about how do you build that into your model. And then the behaviors piece is the culture and the behaviors, and being really intentional about the culture that you want to create, and thinking about, all of those people on the periphery, thinking about how you build everything that you want to see into this new way of work. So not just about hybrid working, but actually how do you embed your sustainability strategy, your D&I strategy on top of that, so that actually you use it as a way to transform the entire business. But those things together, I think you need to look at them, and many more. But ultimately, it's about how do you make a people experience that's much richer for our people.
That's really stark, isn't it? What do you say, 80% of people? So the people's employees, that 80% of your people are saying that they are lonely.
They're lonely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty.
That's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's awful. I'm sure all of us think we would hate to think that that's how our people are feeling, and certainly nobody's, to the assume positive intent. Nobody sets out to make their people feel lonely, but that's just the nature of how long it's gone on and how people have been operating almost on their own in isolation, or at least feeling that they are.
So this has come up a few times, and all the way through, the people at the eye of the storm that can have the biggest impact, but also I think are in danger of the kind of burnout as well, is the leadership. But you talked about leadership empathy. And the thing I think, to me anyway, and I'm not an expert, so I'll ask you guys to jump in a sec, but that leaders need to show empathy, but it needs to be really, really authentic. It needs to be, yes, I hear you. Yes, I understand what your issues are. And you know what? I actually care. So if I ask you how your weekend was, I genuinely care what your answer is. But like, how many leaders do we know or work with who go, how was your weekend? Just to sort of almost a bit of patter before I start asking you about your numbers on a Monday morning, And that kind of, how they can create that sense of belonging, even in a hybrid world, which is really tricky, as Lars said this morning. Anything you want to add on that, Jenny? Or?
Yeah, I think it's really about, and actually just on the point of loneliness, I think people have been lonely for a long time. I think people are lonely in the workplace too. I think suddenly we're just asking the question and we're hearing it. And now we're getting a really stark message back. And we need to listen to that. And I think it talks to this idea of really thinking in a connected way about what we're doing. So something that we do is we have segues at the start of our leadership meetings every week, where it's tell us what you did up for the weekend, what's a personal update, and then what are you focusing on. And so we're building it in to the structure of what we do and the way we work together. And also we're rolling out a new performance and engagement platform, whose name I won't mention, which is really about making sure that we are a lot more purposeful around the time that we spend around one-to-ones and actually thinking about what they're for. Yeah. So again, in the same way as the role of leader has changed, and actually I think we need to start hiring differently in terms of that. I think we need to really, to the point that we've been talking about over the last couple of days, we can't just, it's like we've bought a really old house and the walls are crumbling and the wallpaper's bad. We can't just get paint and paint over it and go, wow, look, we've got hybrid. We still have a shitty house. We need to strip it back.
It's got character, though. Yeah.
Huh?
It's got character.
It's got character,
Yeah.
But it's like,
house, yeah.
It leaks, it's cold, it's limited. But we have to come back and strip it right back. So I think, looking at actually the technology that we're using, how we're using it, how we're actually, the ask that we have differently of ourselves as leaders, but also as HR, as people leaders, but also as individuals. This is a we moment. We all have responsibility for each other. We all collectively need to care for each other. We cannot put everything on the leader. This burdening of the leader, the leader creates the call to action, creates the beacon, the clarion, the sound. But every leader needs followers to be a leader. So those people in teams, we all need to take responsibility ourselves and make sure that we're connecting in, that we are, if we have people reporting to us, that we're asking them those questions, that we are truly caring, and in a genuine way, not a sickly sweet, kind of fake way, but the way we would do it. So it means something. But I think, I think the burden is on all of us. The leaders need to show the way. They need to be the pathfinders, but they can't do it. Gary said, there's a lot of focus on individual performance. And I think in a little bit around hybrid, there's a lot of focus on the leader. But actually, it's teams, it's organizations that win games, that succeed. So I think unless we all really take that burden on ourselves collectively, we'll be here talking next year, and EY survey will be even worse. And we don't want that.
Okay, moving on to burnout, and it's a nice segue because what you're talking about there is personal responsibility and taking action. Like burnout is clearly a threat. It's an issue that we're all probably dealing with, or if we're not, then it's in the post. How much responsibility should we push back onto employees or the people within our business to sort of find and communicate to leadership what their balance is that will hopefully act against that burnout? Because that's quite a confronting. Look, you have to tell me what your balance is. Are businesses doing that, do we think? Or what's happening in your world, Katie, with that?
I think it's that we're still on a journey, and back to what Jenny said around leaders have got to care. And the more that you care, the more you're going to get to know your employees, and you're going to be able to spot the signs of burnout immediately. You know, from the conversation, you know, you only have to say, how are you? And someone says, fine. And you're like, are you really fine?
Yeah.
Or, like, what's going on here?
Or who didn't speak up on that call? You know,
Exactly,
that's the,
yeah. And so I think it's about knowing employees better, but I do think there's a balanced responsibility here.
Yeah.
You know, organizations, so at Bank of America, we've done a lot of work, and many speakers have spoken today about their focus on emotional wellness. We've done a lot of work with our leaders, which quickly extended to the whole of our workforce. So we work with Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington. We've rolled that out across all of our workforce. And we originally were focused that on leaders, but actually now it's available to our entire workforce. In addition, we've rolled it out to the families of our workforce as well through COVID to help with that.
Yeah.
And that is about, I think it's that collective balance of employees saying, okay, you know, this isn't about big shifts, because if you think about a big shift, you're going to put more pressure on yourself. Actually change the small habits. And so some of the Thrive content is very foundational, but so effective for individuals, and anyone can apply that. And so I think that's one of the focus areas we've been looking at. But I do think it's balanced between the employee taking accountability and talking up with the leaders and the managers, having an open environment, creating that safe space, that psychologically safe space where people feel like they can be themselves.
Yeah.
But I also think there's an element on leaders to be vulnerable and to say, hey, I'm a mum of 2. I'm working really hard. I am stressed right now. And being vulnerable and being real, because all of a sudden your teams will be, you know, rally around you.
Yeah.
And you create that mutual respect, that mutual trust, where there is an open conversation about, I'm not feeling so great today.
Yeah. Laura, so we'll go back to the kind of hybrid thing, because obviously some of that stuff is easier to spot when you're face to face. How do you spot what somebody described to me as the first cousin of burnout, which is overwhelmed?
Yeah.
How do you spot that stage in a hybrid world?
Yeah, and it's a really good point, because I completely agree that the responsibility is balanced and the individual has to take responsibility for themselves. But there is a piece with when you're overwhelmed and you're on that road to burnout, where actually it's really difficult to take that step back and reassess and kind of get the perspective. And sometimes you are almost relying on someone else to pivot you to kind of think about, you know, you're going down a really kind of dark route here. We need to help you out. And then you have to kind of engage with that. There is a couple of ways, I think, you know, companies have really embraced employee listening, you know, moving away from kind of the employee engagement survey and really thinking about how do we listen to what our employees are telling us and then use that to act on it and change the experience as a result. But I think we've got a great tool in terms of the technology and the data that's available. So, you know, so many organizations adopted technology overnight, and you know, there's loads of stats coming out, so Teams saying, you know, the use of Teams went up 150% really quickly, but actually 60% of that is unplanned, unstructured, and so there's data there in the system, in the technology that can help you to see, you know, who's working really excessive hours, who's working maybe erratic hours, who's been bombarded with, you know, volumes of emails that's just not really manageable. So I think there is a little bit of how do you create some of that MI within your organization that starts to point to maybe some of your hotspots that then you can go and talk to those people. And I do think then there is a human element, you know, it's the empathetic leadership, it's being able to pick up on those cues that people aren't talking, or, you know, to be vulnerable as well. So I think it's the coupling of the two and using the tools that are at your disposal.
Very good. Keep coming back to leadership, managers, they're the kind of in the eye of the storm here for me, you know, pressure from above to perform, where's my numbers, you know, the economy's going gangbusters, why aren't we, you know, blah, blah, blah. Pressure from underneath, why haven't you created this, you know, idyllic, you know, work practice for me? Come on, meet me where I'm at, you know, not where you're at. So the managers are right in the center, or leadership is right in the center, wherever that might sort of appear in your organization chart. So how do we help leaders and managers find the balance not to burn out? Jenny?
I think it's a really important question. I'm not sure if there's a single answer to that question. I know, I'm sorry. I'll script again. I think first of all is acknowledging that for a start. I think, you know, we've talked about data, we've talked about insights. I think we need to work off what we know as opposed to what we think we know. I think that's the first step. I think we need to be insights driven. So we need to, look at what our people are telling us, including our leaders, and understanding where they're getting that pressure from. I think there's an element where we need to embolden and enrich the skill level of our leaders in a different way than maybe we've done before. I think we're asking them to do things very differently. Our ask has changed. I think we need to recognize that in terms of how we develop, how we support. And I think we need to be really targeted with our leaders in terms of the messaging that we're giving them and say, this is also for you. You also need to be mindful. Something that we've been doing since I've started and before is we do recharge 30 minutes every day. The expectation is that leaders would do it. We don't. We need to do better. We've all these lovely little initiatives and suggestions that we give to our people, but if we don't, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, and my boss is going, Jen, what's the story? Like, you're telling everybody to do this, and you're not doing it. And I'm getting called out, and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to call each other out intentionally, to mind that balanced life that was referenced to earlier on, which I thought was a really nice way of thinking about it. Leaders are only as good as the balance they have in their own life. They stop being effective if they're stressed and burnt out. They'll leave. They won't love what they do anymore. They won't be any good at what they do anymore.
The people will leave.
And people will leave. So leaders,
yeah.
and the mid-level leaders, I think, are the ones that we tend to ignore a bit more than we should. But they're the boots on the ground. They're the cavalry. They're the ones that keep things going. I think we need to really invest, really focus, make sure we're hiring the right people. Make sure that we are bringing people in who have that ability to regulate, who understand the value of that and are setting that example and pushing it down and calling it out, and who can manage. I think part of the reason that leaders are struggling is because they're way out of their comfort zone. They're not actually doing what they used to do, and they don't like it. And so some leaders are not going to make it in the new world of work. I think we need to own that. We need to redefine it, and we need to say, this is what leadership now is, this is what we need, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to grow leadership in our organization going forward, and we need to hire intentionally for that.
Okay. Laura, a quick comment on that, leadership burnout?
It's a really difficult one to manage, and I think we talk about leadership, but I always think it's that manager population, it's that middle group that are, and it's just about equipping them and supporting them with the right, whether that's guides, support, policies, training, to be able to operate in this new world of work, because it is completely different. It's a new job that they're being asked to do.
Yeah. Katie, final comment on that? Anything to add?
I think all of the above. Some really great points here around what we're doing. I think earlier we heard a controversial comment from one of our previous speakers around, well, that's just their job. And I think to some degree it is, but I think we've got a job to make sure that people feel supported, that people feel that they can be, they're listened to, that the challenges within the workforce today are, we're looking at them actively. And what our leaders, our managers are telling us, it is a highly pressurized environment. So how do we make this better for them? Yeah. How can we support them in that? How can we give them the tools, the techniques to be able to thrive in our environment? And to Jenny's point, some will work, some won't. But how do we give them those new tools to be able to thrive in this new work environment?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just back to our Slido question. I don't know if we got any results there, guys, did we? What concerns you most? Social and emotional connectivity. So, and how culture is experienced. So that's kind of what we were talking about. What excites you most? Do we have that one? Becoming more diverse, equal, inclusive. Yeah. Well, hopefully we can achieve that. So look, I just want to sign off by saying thank you very much, Jenny Brown from Teamwork, Laura Flynn from EY, and Katie Ingle from Bank of America. Really enjoyed talking to you today. Thanks very much. Thank you.